Welcome. Today we are talking about quality. More specifically, we're talking about the way that medical device companies operate to ensure the quality of the products that they produce. Now, quality is something that we assume that you already know something about. You've had a lifetime of experiences to judge the world around you on the basis of some quality criterion. For example, you may be very picky about the coffee that you drink. You may only drink latte, or you may only like decaf. There are certain foods that you will not eat. You prefer a car that is clean and well appointed. So quality is not just something that is important to a medical device company. Whether a company makes cars or food or coffee, it will have some kind of a quality assurance program to ensure that the products that it makes are predictable and consistent. The sign that you see on a company warehouse that says ISO certified is making a quality statement. On the other hand, medical device companies have a particular focus on quality. For most of the other products we've talked about, like coffee, you can make a judgment about whether the coffee is good or not. On the other hand, if a company is trying to help you to buy a pacemaker, you have to rely a lot on that company to make the decision for you. You cannot just look at a pacemaker and make a decision that that's the product that will meet your needs. So that companies must be very, very careful to ensure the quality of their products, to ensure that patients are safe. Some of the products that we will talk about today, if they go wrong, will affect your health and may even affect your life. Is it any wonder then that companies have a particular quality focus? Is it any wonder that the regulatory agencies like the FDA also have a quality focus? Because in the end, they're also going to be held to account for the safety of patients. In the US, the Food and Drug Administration has responsibility to ensure that medical devices and pharmaceutical products, in vitro diagnostics, foods, are safe and they perform as advertised. Over the last 30 years, regulations have gradually evolved to ensure that companies have rules which they can follow if they're trying to make a medical product. You can find these rules and read them easily in a very large book called the Code of Federal Regulations. Now, all of FDA regulations are grouped into one volume, into Title 21 of this code. The regulations for medical devices are in Part 820 of the code. Now, you can find these by opening the book, but then you'd have to find the book. Easier, perhaps, is to find them on the web. If you go to the main website of the FDA and just click Code of Federal Regulations, it will take you a search page that will allow you to open these regulations very easily. As a result, regulations do not apply the same way to all of the products that we make. Let's talk first about a pacemaker. A pacemaker is critical for life. If you have a pacemaker, you would like to be sure that the company that makes it has spent an enormous amount of time, energy, and money to be sure that that pacemaker will not fail once it's put in your body. Now, on the other hand, we have a product like this. This is a bedpan. It would be wasteful for a company to spend as many resources and as much time to make the kind of quality decisions about this as they do about a pacemaker. So the kinds of quality systems we'll talk about today are really going to apply to the more risky of device classes. Typically, they apply to what we call Class 2 and Class 3 devices. Class 1 devices, your tongue depressors, your bedpans, typically are waived from these quality systems regulations. So before you start any decision making about the level of quality systems that you need in your company, you want to first consult with your quality manager to make sure that the products that you are making are covered and need to be made according to quality systems regulations. The other thing that you need to be aware of is that not all countries require the same kinds of quality systems regulations as they do in the US. They're not very different. Countries like Canada or the European Union follow a slightly different set of rules called ISO 13485. Now, ISO 13485 covers the same kinds of quality topics that we'll talk about today. However, the regulations are written in a slightly different way, so you may find that your company will want to take those regulations into account as well as the U.S. regulations. If you understand the U.S. rules, you are pretty much there in understanding rules that govern other countries. Most medical device companies, however, do sell product into many different countries. So before you set up a quality system in your company, you would want to check with your quality department to ensure the number and different types of regulations that you should follow. In this session, we're going to talk about the quality systems regulations that you must follow if you're making products in the USA. Now, you should understand that these regulations carry the force of law. If you break the regulations, both you and your company can incur significant penalties. You can even go to jail. So it's really important that you understand at least some of the regulations in detail, those that apply to your job category, and that you follow them. As part of your work, you will have several training sessions to understand quality regulations. Today, all we want to do is give you a brief overview of several of the parts of the quality systems regulations as a way of introducing you to the system. Let's look at these topics quickly, and then we can go on to helping you understand how to follow the regulations in a bit more detail. Now, this is a long list, perhaps even an overwhelming list. All of the areas are important, but the FDA focuses on some more than others. One of the areas that the FDA has recently viewed as very important is the first, the area called management controls. The regulations on management controls are directed more at your boss than at you, but they will affect the way that you do your work. Folks in upper management are always busy. They don't always have the kinds of time to devote to the quality systems that might be important to ensure that they're done well. Now let's look at an example of a situation in which the quality systems are being affected by the management structure. Now I guess you can see the problem, but even the best CEO doesn't have the time to do everything related to quality in a company. The FDA makes it clear that a first responsibility of the executive management is to identify at least one person who will be responsible for the quality functions in the company. In addition, the executive management must then give that person sufficient resources to be able to carry out their job properly. Now, you can often tell the amount of attention and care that a company places in their quality systems by the kind of person that they appoint to this job. A good quality representative needs to have enough clout to be able to go to the CEO when problems arise. In addition, such a person needs to understand their responsibilities thoroughly. They should be able to understand that they must meet with the executive management at regular scheduled intervals so that they can talk about how well their company is doing and where the problems are. Now, without adequate resources, without adequate people, it's difficult in a big company to make sure that all the jobs that need to be done are done. So the quality manager, the quality representative, who may be called the VP of quality, for example, will need to have a cadre of people below them who do the functions that are required to ensure that the company stays in compliance. If a company gets a warning letter from the FDA, if a company is cited, if a company is given a lot of negative press over their quality systems, it's going to affect their ability to sell product and the reputation that they have in the public. So you can bet that your CEO is going to care a lot about the image that the company portrays and the quality systems that are in place. In the situation that follows, can you identify at least 3 ways that the company is attempting to communicate its quality values? The FDA will expect to see memos and speeches about the importance of quality. The only way they'll, of course, know that those have happened is if they see the paper that's announcing those speeches and other activities. But at the same time, they appreciate that actions are more important than words. That is, if problems arise related to quality systems. The most convincing evidence that the FDA can have of your sincerity is the fact that the executive management, together with the rest of the company, works very hard and efficiently to correct those problems. This communicates to the rank and file that the quality systems are important and that the executive management is going to take them very seriously indeed. Now, the second area of activities on which much focus has recently been placed is the area of design controls. We know from terrible experiences that about half of the medical product problems that we've seen in the field relate to problems in design. In 1997, when these regulations were put in place, a new section was added to ensure that people followed certain systematic methods when they were designing a product. These methods included a fair amount of documentation at every level of the activity. The FDA expects that design controls will be an important part of your product activities and expects that those controls will be in place at least by the time that you start clinical trials on any new product. Design controls are a series of steps to ensure that products are developed and designed in a way that will ensure that any problems are caught before they reach the manufacturing stage. It requires that the product that you make responds to the requirements of the customer. It also requires that the products are reviewed very carefully as you move through different steps, from the definition of product requirements to the specifications that are important for that product to the ultimate prototyping of that product. At each step, you have to reflect back on the step before to ensure that what you have done meets the needs of the step before. We call this the design waterfall. An important aspect of the design control process are these things called reviews. Reviews are done by special boards of people that include not only people responsible for the design of the product, but others who are chosen from outside of the project to ensure that all the different aspects of problems can be considered and can be remediated before you advance to the next stage. You may, during your life at this company, see these kinds of reviews taking place. These meetings are typically called design review meetings, and they may be held by a design review board or what we call sometimes a product qualification review board. At the end of these meetings, documents will be signed off that assure that the people at the meeting feel that the product is ready to advance to the next level. Now, we will go back to design review even after manufacturing if a change has been made to the product. By going back and ensuring that that change is implemented and then reviewed carefully before we manufacture the product, we may make sure that a change in one area of the product doesn't cause a negative problem in another area of the product that might not have been easily anticipated. If you're in a startup company, you should pay particular attention to design controls and management controls. They are typically the areas that you implement first, and they serve as a strong base for your later manufacturing activities. However, we will not talk much more about design controls in this session. We're going to leave that for a later video. Let's go back now to the quality systems regulations and look again at the list. Many of the elements on the list have to do with manufacturing. This isn't surprising because in the 1980s, the first quality systems regulations, which were called good manufacturing practices, were aimed specifically at ensuring the quality of manufacturing. So you can see that this list includes a variety of things like process controls, equipment calibration, labeling, packaging, training. All these things have to do specifically with manufacturing. So there are many areas, but in each area we follow the same kind of ritual dance. First, we plan our quality activities. Then we write procedures, and we carry out the activities that are associated with that procedure. After we're done the activity, we have some way of monitoring or assessing its outcome so that we can make sure that whatever we did was done properly. If we find deviations from the procedure, or if we find that the procedure isn't working for us, then we have to go back to look at our quality planning and change the procedure or change the plan. So we go round and around and around this quality circle to be sure that when we do implement an activity, we have a way of checking that it did what it had to do. So we plan, we do, and we check. We plan, we do, and we check. Now clearly, any problems, whether it be an incoming, manufacturing, or finished product, is going to affect the product in a way that isn't going to be what you want. But let us look first at the beginning of the process, at incoming product. This may be an area that gets less attention than perhaps the manufacturing and finished product part. Now, when you make a product, the product is only as good as the parts that go into it. Garbage in, expensive garbage out by the time you manufacture it, you label it, you package it, you give it to somebody who then has a big problem. So a lot of attention needs to be paid to the way that you acquire those incoming pieces, the components, the reagents, all the things that you're going to use in your manufacturing process. A controlled manufacturing process begins with a careful consideration of the components that go into the product. Usually your design team will spend a lot of time in specifying exactly the components that you will need. These considerations will include not only catalog numbers and other obvious things, but more specific aspects that you might not think about. Things like special treatments that need to be applied to the components, etching, reliability considerations. So before the product is made, you will have to be sure that you know exactly why you're making the decisions about the parts that you're ordering and not to order parts that go outside of those specifications. Sometimes you will use hard things like capacitors and resistors and batteries, but sometimes you will also use things like reagents, liquids that may not go specifically into the product but are used during the manufacturing process. Usually in drug manufacture, we use highly purified reagents that are called USP grade reagents. In medical products development, sometimes you need highly purified chemicals and sometimes you don't. So part of the specification process may be, for example, defining how pure your water needs to be. Does it need to be distilled water? Does it need to be, highly distilled, deionized water, or will tap water do? After each component has been specified, it has to be ordered and purchased. You must choose a vendor who can meet all the necessary product specifications. You also must choose a vendor who's reliable. If a product comes in late or an inappropriate product is delivered, this can slow production and cost your company a lot of money. As a result, your vendor must be qualified. We may need to visit a vendor in order to audit their facilities. We need to check sample parts, and then we have to continue to check the parts over time. The relationship that we develop with a vendor is crucially important for the quality of the product. It is particularly important if we have a critical component whose failure can result in a life-threatening situation. So we do not want to switch vendors unless we have to. At the same time, we want to make sure that perhaps we have a backup vendor in case the first vendor has a problem. Now, even the best of vendors can run into problems. Sometimes they change hands, sometimes they change their product lines, sometimes they just find that they have somebody working for them who doesn't do as good a job as the person before. When that happens, we have to be alert to the severity of the problem and ready to investigate and change vendors. Usually engineers go to trade shows in order to keep track of the vendors who are available for different components in their product. That way, they are somewhat prepared if a problem arises. Normally, a product that comes into a company has an acceptance procedure. Typically, the box is not opened. It's taken to a quarantine area and locked up until the inspection technician has time to open the box. When the box is opened, a number of questions must be asked. Does the order seem to be the one that you had asked for? Are the appropriate number of parts there? Do the parts meet the specifications? There may be special tests that you're going to have to apply to those parts in order to be sure that they really are what you wanted. If you have, say, 1,000 or more parts in that box, you may need to apply a specific statistical sampling method in order to be sure that you feel confident the product is appropriate for your needs. If the product passes that inspection, it's generally marked with a green sticker and sent forward to a storage zone where it's going to be sent into active stores. That will then be turned into product. But what if the product fails? Now you need to have a fairly rigorous method to ensure you understand why the failure occurred. Did it happen because you ordered improperly? Did it happen because your specifications were wrong? Perhaps the vendor made a mistake. You'll need to record that in the vendor file so that you can keep track of the progress of that vendor in subsequent orders. You'll have to make a decision about what to do with your product now. Are you going to send it back? Are you going to throw it out? Are you going to do something to it so that now you can use it in the product? You will find that the personnel who are responsible for incoming inspection are very focused. When a product comes in, it's given a number, and that number follows it into the finished product. If for any reason there is a problem with the product, we can then trace back to find out if the components were at fault. Acceptance procedures are important. They involve a lot of documentation. If it isn't written down, it didn't happen. Typically, the people who do the inspections are responsible to sign and date the records to be sure that we know that they were done and by whom. Can you see the problem that the student caused when they circumvented the established procedures? Perhaps the product that they moved into active stores will be made into product and we will have a failure. We may never find that failure, the cause of that failure, because we lack documentation. The quality team is also very concerned about facilities. Now, quite often the products that we make need to be made in special facilities such as clean rooms. In situations where special facilities are needed, much attention will be paid to the rules that govern the management of that facility. For example, in a clean room where the amount of dust and dirt needs to be highly controlled, there will be a large number of procedures regarding gowning, regarding airflow, regarding even the paper that you take into the clean room. You will be trained specifically on those procedures if you use such facilities. In any such facility, there will typically be also a large number of procedures relating to the maintenance of the facility. We'll care a lot about humidity control. We'll care a lot about how janitorial services are managed in such a protected environment. All of these procedures will need to be done on schedule, and they'll need to be documented so that when you are audited by the FDA, you can show proof that you have been working in a facility that's been tightly monitored and has been checked to be sure that the, for example, level of dust that you need in a clean room is within acceptable tolerances. As you might guess, to manage a whole manufacturing facility with its many different rooms, many different aspects, is a very challenging job. It involves everything from waste disposal to pest control. Let us take something as inconspicuous as an ant in your manufacturing facility. Is this a problem? What does it say about your pest control procedures? And if you find an ant, what are you going to do about it? Are you just going to spray it with something out of a can, remembering that whatever you spray in this environment might go into a medical product. So you're going to need to have procedures to deal with something even as small as an ant. You may also have to make a definition of when the ant becomes a problem. Is one ant allowed? Is 2 ants a problem? At what point do you have a problem? Can your ants be in your production facility? Can you find them in your lunchroom? So all of these things will need to be defined. Another area of particular focus is that of equipment. Now, the equipment that you use to make a medical product is often critical in assessing the safety and functionality of that product. Thus, you may find that the equipment in your facility gets as much attention as a patient in a hospital, perhaps even more so. Now, what do you care about when you're thinking about equipment? You will have to have ways of making sure that that equipment is working properly at all time. Typically, 2 aspects are of particular importance. One would be its calibration, and another would be its maintenance. So for every piece of equipment, you have a number of documents that goes into what essentially is an equipment log or equipment book. That might include a procedure for calibration, a procedure for maintenance, a log for calibration, a log for maintenance, any records of non-conforming calibrations. Once you've calibrated a machine a couple of times, it will have a trend line. If, for example, every time you calibrate a particular machine, it's in calibration, and then at your next calibration session it falls out, what now are you going to do? Does this mean you have to change your procedure to calibrate more often? So equipment can become an important aspect of quality functions. Usually, at least once a year, the Quality Control Division of the Quality Assurance Department will come and work with your equipment. Quite often this means they must retrieve the equipment from your laboratory or your facility. Now, it is not uncommon for the time of retrieval to be a time of angst for the people who normally use the equipment. There's nothing worse than having a piece of machinery that you're counting on using being taken out of your facility. So the Quality Assurance Department has to work quite carefully with other parts of the facility to ensure that fights don't erupt over the timing at which the equipment is taken and the length of time that they keep it. Many of the quality principles important in accepting new products also apply to the evolving product. You may see QA staff who are obsessing on the inspection and documentation of the product as it goes down the assembly line. These people are doing a very important job. They are trying to save money for the company as well as ensure the quality of the product. The money that they save will eventually be rolled into your year-end bonus. So it's important to support these folks. Now, at the end of the assembly, the product is signed off after inspection, and we call that sign-off process its release. That signifies that the product is ready for distribution and sale. Now, along the line of assembly, many people will have signed off on the particular small pieces of assembly that they have done. At the end, you will have a piece of paper called a traveler that has many, many signatures. The final signature will be that of the QA manager. Each of these people who signs the traveler takes a large responsibility. Their signature is essentially a signature on a legal document. So if they sign that piece of paper without being sure that that procedure has worked effectively, they are taking a large risk and they're putting the company at risk. Fraud is taken very seriously by the FDA. Now, when product is released in small numbers, it's generally possible to inspect each item. However, in some cases, we produce very large volumes of product, and it's not practical to inspect every item. In addition, sometimes the inspection that we need to do is destructive. The product needs to be destroyed. Obviously, we don't want to destroy every piece of product that comes off the assembly line. In such cases, we will be using a method of statistical sampling in order to at least evaluate a representative sample. One of the sections of the quality systems regulations deals with statistical sampling. It's unlikely that you will deal with statistical sampling. Rather, the QA person will set that sampling regimen up for you. It is, however, important that you understand that those procedures must be followed in order for us to be sure that the products that are evaluated are safe for subsequent human use. How does your company know that your quality system is in good shape? An important tool for this is the audit. Now, typically in a company, a group of people who are specially trained to conduct audits will visit your site on regular intervals to ensure that you are doing your job, that procedures are followed, that the area is appropriately cleaned and maintained, that the equipment is in calibration. Essentially, those auditors will poke their noses into a whole number of operations. What they are trying to do is assess the level of compliance with the quality systems. The audit serves as the main method by which management can understand the way its company is working. The audit is really, in a sense, a training tool. It's a way in which you can understand the extent to which you are in compliance and serves as a benchmark for improvement. Now, the internal audits prepare you for external audits. In the US, the FDA is the auditor typically that will ensure your compliance with quality systems regulations. In a few cases, it is possible to use another auditor, but in this video, we will assume that the FDA is going to be your auditor. The FDA will visit your manufacturing facility at least once in every 2 years. It may also do surprise inspections if it has information that leads it to believe that you are not in compliance and that there's something to worry about. The FDA will additionally visit your facility before you release a new product in what is called a pre-approval inspection. FDA audits are important because if they go wrong, the results of the audits can have serious implications for the company. Thus, typically, a company has procedures to deal with FDA auditors and people who are trained to handle them carefully. Now, you may be asked occasionally to speak to an auditor. When that happens, you must be very careful about what you do. Be careful about your choice of words, keeping your answers short, to the point, and above all, honest. Let the people who are escorting the FDA auditors do their job. They have nightmares about people who talk too much to the FDA auditors about their problems, real and imagined, in ways that distract the auditors and make them insecure about the quality of your system. Findings from audits are only one source of feedback that you can use to check on the quality systems of your company. Now, there are lots of other sources. They might include things like complaints from patients. They might include what you get back from your marketing people or your service people in terms of what's happening in the field. They might come in the form of articles in the newspaper. All of the kinds of information that you find that have implications on the way you do your business should be fed back into the quality systems. Complaints are a very important mechanism by which we can identify those things that are not working well. If the complaint is accompanied by a defective product, then we have a special procedure. Usually that product is entered into something we call a non-conforming material report. The non-conforming material report is a kind of a paper traveler for the defective product. It follows that defective product not just through the acceptance of the product back to the company, but its investigation, so that at the end, this non-conforming material report and all the associated reports that go with it can show the FDA and your company executives how that problem was handled. If that product has a fault that needs in some way to be systematically corrected in your system, if something needs to be done to prevent that problem from happening again, we go into a very important loop called corrective and preventive actions. Now, corrective and preventive actions are a way of ensuring that the wrong things that happen in your company are made right. Thus, most companies have rather sophisticated systems by which they can organize and track their documents so that they can retrieve them when they need them. Important documents like standard operating procedures and forms will typically be given a number and entered into something called a document control system. Now, once a document or a form has been entered into this system, it cannot be changed unless it's reviewed by a special committee. When the committee decides that a document is to be reviewed, it will look very carefully at the revisions that are made. It will try to understand if those revisions affect other documents or activities in the company. It'll also try to understand whether those activities are going to affect the way that personnel operate. Perhaps training will be needed to ensure that personnel know how to use that new procedure. All of these considerations are summarized in a form called the document change form. The document change form identifies the nature of the change, the new revision, any training that's required, and how the new form should be distributed. This document change form is kept in the records and serves as a framework to allow the old documents to be retrieved and the new documents to be distributed in their place. Now, you can really screw up this system if you Xerox a procedure that is normally controlled and now put it in your bottom drawer. That way, when the new procedure is issued, you may not get a copy of it, and you may find yourself working on an outdated procedure. You need to be sure that the documents in your area are current and in good shape. Your quality assurance department can help you if you are confused about the rules that govern the development or implementation of different kinds of documents. The rules that we describe here are not complete, but I think they give you a good start at understanding the requirements of quality systems regulations. After you've been at your company for a little while, you'll probably learn more about specific activities associated with certain specialized areas. But for now, what is the bottom line for you? What does your company want you to do to contribute to the quality activities? First, accept and value training. You should be sure that you are appropriately trained to do your job function. Often your job function requires many forms of training, not only quality training, but also training in procedures and practices and documentation. Many times people feel unhappy about having to do such training, but it will contribute to your skill set and potentially eventually contribute to your ability to rise in the company and to be paid more money. Third, document correctly. Ensure that you document your work by signing and dating forms correctly. If you make a mistake, be sure that you know how the company wants you to clarify that mistake. Usually, they want you to put a single line through the error and sign and date the change that you've made. 4, wear appropriate protective gear. It is not cool to break the rules to establish your own personal identity unless your personal identity is that of a loser. It is just not cool to contaminate medical devices with your skin oil and your hair. 5th, admit mistakes. Mistakes happen, and when they do, it is important that you are responsible enough to step up to the plate. Usually, mistakes that are caught early can be corrected. People will respect you for making that admission and allowing them the opportunity to intervene rather than allowing the mistake to affect the quality and integrity of the product. Finally, help and train others. Your job will be easier. You'll also be regarded by the company as a leader, as somebody that they can trust to be part of the team. Well, where do you go if you want to get more information about quality systems? Well, your quality assurance department can be a huge resource. They'll probably be pleased and astonished if you look them up and ask them some questions. There are several organizations that also deal almost exclusively with quality issues. The American Society for Quality is one such organization. They have many publications and training opportunities of very high quality. And finally, I'm sure that you will be treated to many more training opportunities such as this.